The diner hummed with the clatter of trays and the sizzle of fries. But beneath the surface, a heavy silence clung to the air like grease on the griddle. Emma stood behind the counter at Sonny's Eats, her hands moving with practiced precision. As she tapped orders into the register, her smile a fragile mask that never quite reached her tired hazel eyes. She was 24, supporting her younger siblings on her own, and every shift felt like a tightrope walk over a pit of unspoken fears. Customers streamed in, their voices a low murmur, but the staff moved like shadows, their laughter long replaced by the mechanical rhythm of work. Victor Crane, the shift supervisor, loomed near the fryer, his arms crossed, his sharp gaze slicing through the room without a word. His presence alone was enough to make hands tremble and voices drop to whispers. Emma handed a tray to a customer, her fingers brushing the receipt, and caught sight of a man in a corner booth, his eyes not on his food but on her, steady and searching. Michael, dressed in a plain jacket, looked like any other customer, but his gaze carried weight, as if he saw the cracks in the diner's polished facade. When he approached the counter to pay, Emma swiped his card, a sleek black and gold one, unlike the usual debit cards, and the machine beeped, flashing declined. Her heart skipped, a familiar dread pooling in her stomach as she glanced at Victor, who shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her hands trembling as she slid the card back. Michael's face remained calm, almost too calm, as he pulled out a few crumpled bills and said, "No problem, cash works." But his eyes lingered. On her, not with judgment, but with something softer, something that saw the fear she hid behind her smile. As he walked back to his booth, tray in hand, Emma felt Victor's stare burn into her back, a silent warning that needed no words. Emma double-checked the next order, her fingers hesitating over the screen, her breath shallow as she fought to keep her mask in place. Michael sipped his drink, his gaze sweeping the room, catching the way Sarah, a new hire, flinched when Victor passed by, and how Daniel, the cook, kept his head down, his hands steady, but his jaw tight. Something was wrong, not just broken but deliberately shattered, and Michael's quiet observation marked the start of something bigger. Michael scribbled a note on a napkin, his pen moving with purpose, and whispered to himself, "This isn't just a diner, it's a battlefield." Emma's sneakers squeaked faintly on the diner's tiled floor as she wiped down the counter, her movements quick but cautious, like a deer sensing a predator nearby. Michael sat in his usual booth, his tray untouched, his eyes tracing the rhythm of the diner servers darting between tables, cooks flipping burgers with mechanical precision, and Emma, always Emma, checking orders twice, her fingers hovering over the register as if afraid to make a sound. He'd been coming to Sonny's Eats for 3 days now, each visit peeling back another layer of the diner's quiet decay. Today, he noticed Sarah, a new hire with wide eyes and a nervous smile, carrying a stack of trays to the dish pit. Victor emerged from the back, his voice low but cutting. "Sarah, grease traps need cleaning." Sarah froze, her hands tightening around the trays, and stammered, "I thought I was on register today." Victor didn't look at her, just pointed to the back hallway, his silence louder than any shout. Sarah's shoulders slumped as she set the trays down and shuffled away, her face flushed with something between shame and resignation. Michael's pen scratched against his napkin, noting the moment, his jaw tightening as he recognized the pattern of arbitrary tasks, sudden reassignments, all designed to keep the staff off balance. Michael leaned forward, his coffee cooling, and watched as Victor circled the kitchen like a hawk, his gaze pinning workers in place without a word. Later, near the drink station, Michael approached Sarah, keeping his voice casual. "Tough day?" She glanced around, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not the work, it's like they're testing how much we'll take before we break." Her words hung heavy, a truth spoken in the cracks of the diner's routine. Michael nodded, his mind racing, piecing together the bigger picture short shifts on the schedule. But Emma and others worked longer, unpaid hours. He wandered to the break room door, where a clipboard hung with the weekly shift chart. Emma's name was listed for 5 hours, but he'd seen her here from open to close, easily 8. The handwriting was neat, precise. Not hers, likely Victor's. Michael's phone clicked softly as he snapped a photo, his heart pounding with the weight of what he was uncovering. Back at his booth, he overheard a cook mutter to another. Paychecks. Short again, but who's gonna say anything? The words were a spark, igniting Michael's resolve. He wasn't just a customer. He was the founder of Sonny's Eats, a man who'd built this chain from a single grill, now haunted by how far it had strayed. Years ago, he'd walked these floors, apron tied tight, dreaming of a place where workers felt like family. Now, that dream was suffocating under Victor's control. Michael scribbled another note, his hands steady but his chest tight with guilt. He'd let this happen. Stayed distant while his diners became battlegrounds. Sarah returned from the grease. Traps, her hands red and raw, her eyes avoiding everyone. Michael approached her, voice low. "You don't deserve this." She flinched, then whispered, "No one does, but if you complain, you're off the schedule." Her words were a knife, cutting through the diner's silence, confirming what Michael feared. This wasn't just one bad manager. It was a system, deliberate and cruel, designed to keep voices quiet. Emma, meanwhile, dropped a spoon, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. Victor's head turned, his eyes locking onto her, and she murmured, "I'm sorry," her voice barely audible. Michael's fingers tightened around his pen, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about saving Sonny's Eats. It was about saving the people who kept it alive. Emma's breath caught as she slipped into the break room, the faint hum of the diner's kitchen fading behind the door. Her hands, still damp from wiping counters, clutched a crumpled receipt she'd found tucked under the register, a handwritten note with numbers that didn't add up, signed with Victor's initials. She didn't know why she kept it, only that. It felt like holding a piece of the truth, something solid in a place where fear turned everything slippery. Michael sat in his booth, his eyes no longer those of a curious customer, but a man piecing together a puzzle. He'd noticed Daniel, the cook with steady hands and a quiet defiance, moving through the kitchen like a rock in a storm. Unlike the others, Daniel didn't flinch when Victor passed by, his knife slicing onions with calm precision, his gaze steady even under scrutiny. Michael approached him during the lull, leaning against the prep counter, voice low. "You've been here a while, haven't you?" Daniel nodded, his eyes flicking up briefly. 3 years. Seen a lot. Michael caught the weight in his tone, the unspoken stories buried in those words. Later, as the diner emptied, Daniel motioned Michael to the back hallway, away from the cameras. He pulled a small USB drive from his apron, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is from the register camera. 2 weeks ago. Victor stayed late, opened the drawer, took cash. No log, no paperwork." Michael's pulse quickened as he took the drive, its weight heavier than its size. "You kept this?" he asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. Had to. People like Emma, they don't deserve this. Michael pocketed the drive, his mind racing. This was proof, not just suspicion. Michael caught her glance, and when their eyes met, she hesitated, then slipped her phone from her pocket. In the break room, she showed him a screenshot of her bank app, her voice trembling. 8 hours worked, but only 5 paid. Every week, it's short by $50, $60. Her eyes glistened, not with defeat, but with a raw, quiet courage, as if showing him was her first step out of the shadows. Michael studied the screen, the numbers a stark confirmation of the theft woven into the diner's rhythm. "I kept these in case someone believed me," Emma whispered, her voice cracking, a tear slipping down her cheek. Michael's chest tightened, he saw not just her pain but her strength, the kind that held her family together despite the weight of this place. He nodded. "I believe you." Those words, simple and steady, seemed to anchor her, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. Daniel's voice broke his thoughts, low and firm. "I've seen Victor do it 3 times. Always after close, always no record. But no one talks, because talking gets you erased." Michael scribbled notes on a napkin, his hand steady but his heart heavy with guilt for letting this fester. He snapped another photo of the shift chart, the mismatched hours glaring like a confession. Emma returned to the counter, her mask back in place, but her eyes held a new spark, a flicker of trust in Michael. As he sat back in his booth, the USB drive burned in his pocket, a piece of truth that could break the silence. Daniel, flipping burgers nearby, caught Michael's eye and gave a single nod, a silent pact between them. Michael whispered to himself, "This isn't just about one diner anymore." The weight of Emma's tears, Daniel's courage, and his own resolve pressed down, forging a path forward. The diner's hum felt different now, not just the sound of work, but a pulse of something waking up, something ready to fight. Michael's hotel room was a cocoon of shadows, the only light spilling from his laptop screen as he sifted through the digital underbelly of Sonny's Eats. The USB drive Daniel had given him sat heavy on the desk, its grainy footage of Victor, pocketing cash from the register replaying in a silent loop, each frame a stark accusation. But Michael's focus had shifted beyond the Houston diner, his founder's access to the corporate database revealing a chilling pattern. 7 locations, Houston, Austin, Memphis, and others bled dry by underreported wages, missing cash, and payroll adjustments, all linked to Margaret Holt, the regional director whose signature stamped every irregularity. His hands trembled slightly as he compiled the evidence. Emma's screenshots of shorted paychecks, Daniel's video, mismatched shift logs, each piece a shard of truth piercing the diner's suffocating silence. He worked late, the city's hum a distant pulse, until the folder on his screen held a case tiny enough to break the system open. The next morning, Michael drove to the corporate office, the folder tucked into his briefcase like a weapon, his heart a drumbeat of purpose and dread. Margaret Holt's office was a fortress of glass, her desk gleaming under fluorescent light, her smile sharp as she rose to greet him. "Michael, what a surprise," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of calculation. He didn't sit, instead laying the folder open, pages fanning out spreadsheets of wage cuts, cash discrepancies, and Victor's handwritten notes. "This stops now," Michael said, his voice low but unyielding, pointing to a payroll adjustment signed by Margaret. 7 diners, thousands in stolen wages, and you approved it all. Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her desk. "You're oversimplifying, Michael. Businesses make tough calls to stay afloat." Her words were a blade, slicing at his faith in the company he'd built. A company meant to be a home, not a prison. He pushed the folder closer, his finger tracing a line of falsified hours. "This isn't survival. It's exploitation, and it's deliberate." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You think you can walk in here and unravel everything? Some things are better left alone." The air thickened, her warning a cold weight, but Michael held her gaze, his voice steady. "Not when people like Emma are paying the price." He left the folder on her desk, walking out as her silence chased him, sharp and heavy. Back at the diner, Emma moved through her shift like a ghost, her hands meticulous as she rang up orders, her eyes darting to Victor, who stood by the fryer, his presence a storm cloud over the kitchen. In the break room, she'd slipped Michael a new piece of evidence, a printed email from Clara, a former employee fired for questioning payroll errors. The email, from Margaret, was blunt. Cut hours, reduce pay, Terminate anyone who pushes back. Emma's voice had trembled as she handed it over, her eyes wet but fierce. I kept it because I needed to believe someone would care, she'd said, and Michael's quiet "I do" had steadied her, a lifeline in the dark. He sent the evidence to David, the CFO, in an email labeled "Regional Fraud. Immediate action required," attaching every file, every photo, every frame of truth. As the email vanished into the ether, his phone buzzed with a message from Clara, her words cautious. "I'll meet you, but no names, no trail. I've lost enough." Michael felt the fight swelling, no longer just about one diner but a network of betrayal. At the counter, Emma fumbled a coffee cup, the clatter drawing Victor's cold stare. "Careful," he said, his voice a blade. "Mistakes have consequences." Emma nodded, her throat tight, but her eyes held a spark of defiance, kindled by Michael's belief in her. In his car, Michael opened his voice recorder, his words measured but urgent. "Margaret Holt oversees wage theft and intimidation across 7 locations. Evidence from Emma, Daniel, and Clara confirms it. If this doesn't reach the board, it goes public." The diner's neon sign glowed in the distance, a beacon of both pain and hope. And Michael knew this was no longer just his battle. It was Emma's, Daniel's, Clara's, a chorus of voices refusing to stay silent. The diner's neon sign flickered in the dawn light as Emma stood behind the counter, her hands steady for the first time in months, though her heart thumped with a mix of fear and hope. The news had broken overnight, a storm unleashed by Michael's. Emailed to David, the CFO, with headlines blazing across screens. "Sonny's Eats, workers robbed in silence." A leaked photo of Emma, her tear-streaked face captured in a moment of raw vulnerability under the diner's harsh lights, had become the heart of the outrage, shared thousands of times, each retweet a demand for justice. Customers flooded social media with boycott calls. Former employees posted stories of shorted paychecks and intimidation, and investors scrambled, their trust in the chain eroding. Michael sat in a cramped rented office, his phone vibrating with notifications, his eyes locked on a news broadcast announcing Margaret Holt's suspension and Victor Crane's firing. The evidence: Emma's screenshots, Daniel's security footage. Clara's damning email had torn through the company's facade, exposing a machine of exploitation. Emma felt the shift in the diner's air, the absence of Victor's shadow like a weight lifted, but the eyes of her coworkers still darted nervously, unsure if the storm would save them or swallow them whole. Michael appeared on a televised statement that afternoon, his voice calm but heavy with conviction, broadcast to every Sonny's Eats location. "To every worker who's felt silenced, I'm sorry," he said, his eyes steady on the camera. "I built this company to be a home, and I let it become a cage. That ends today." His words rippled through the diner, where Emma watched on a small break-room TV, her hands clasped tight, tears welling not from fear but from being seen. Daniel stood beside her, his usual calm unbroken, but his nod to her carried a quiet pride. Michael pledged immediate reforms, transparent payroll, independent audits, and a hotline for employee concerns, promises that felt like a lifeline to those who'd lived under Victor's gaze. Back at the diner, Emma was called to a staff meeting, her apron swapped for a new badge, assistant manager. She stood at the front of the room, her voice shaky at first, addressing coworkers who once avoided her eyes. "I know what it's like to work afraid," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "But we're done with that. We'll fight for each other now." The applause was soft but real, a murmur of trust beginning to bloom. Daniel took the floor next, his steady hands gesturing to a slide projected behind him, leading with respect. He spoke simply, "Good managers don't break people, they build them." His words, grounded in years of watching the diner's heart erode, sparked nods from the younger staff, including Sarah, who smiled for the first time since her reassignment to grease traps. Outside, the boycott signs faded as customers returned. Drawn by the promise of change, their chatter filling the diner with a warmth it hadn't known in years. Michael met with Clara in a quiet cafe, her hands steady now as she handed over more documents, internal memos showing Margaret's orders to cut costs at the expense of workers. "I lost my job for this," Clara said, her voice firm, "but I'd do it again if it means people like Emma get to breathe." Michael nodded, his gratitude silent but deep, knowing her courage had fueled the fire. Social media buzzed with stories from other diners, workers sharing photos of shorted pay stubs, their comments a chorus of single periods left as a quiet nod to shared pain, inspired by Michael's call in an interview. "If you've worked in fear, leave a dot. It's enough to be heard." The dots multiplied, a digital testament to the scope of the betrayal. Emma, now training new hires, moved with a new confidence, her smile no longer a mask but a reflection of her strength. She caught Michael's eye as he visited, slipping him a note. "Thank you for believing us." He pocketed it, his chest tight with the weight of her trust, a reminder of why he'd fought. In his office, Michael reviewed the board's response. Margaret's termination was final, and the task force was investigating other regions. The diner hummed with life again, not just orders and fries, but laughter, small talk, the sound of a workplace healing. Emma's promotion wasn't just a title. It was a promise that no one would be erased again. Michael sat alone later, watching a news clip of workers hugging outside a Memphis diner, their relief palpable. The fight had cost him sleepless nights and the illusion of his company's purity, but it had given back something greater, a chance to rebuild what he'd lost to silence. Emma pushed open the door to Sonny's Eats, the familiar scent of grilled onions and fresh coffee wrapping around her like a warm embrace. But today the diner felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the laughter of a new hire joking with Daniel at the grill, their voices mingling with the clink of dishes and the soft hum of customers chatting over breakfast. Emma, now assistant manager, moved with a quiet confidence, her badge gleaming under her apron as she guided a trainee through the register's quirks, her smile genuine, no longer a shield but a beacon. Michael stepped inside, his daughter Lily at his side, her eyes wide with curiosity as she clutched a rag, eager to wipe tables. "I want to help, Dad," she said, her voice bright, and Michael's heart swelled, seeing in her the same spark he'd once had when he opened his first diner. He nodded. "Start with the tables, kiddo. That's where it all begins." The diner buzzed with a new rhythm, free of the heavy silence that had once choked it. Servers called out orders with ease, and cooks shared quick smiles, the air light with trust. Emma caught Michael's eye, her nod a silent thank you, her hand steady as she handed a customer their change, no longer trembling under Victor's shadow. Michael settled into a corner booth, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the transformation. Sarah, once relegated to grease traps, now laughed as she refilled coffee, her confidence blooming. Daniel, flipping burgers with his usual calm, narrated a training video playing on a small screen in the break room, his voice steady. Leadership isn't about control, it's about lifting each other up. The video showed real moment stints, shifts from the past fading into scenes of workers joking, helping one another, a testament to the diner's healing. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "You gave us our voice back." He read it twice, his throat tight, the words a quiet victory more powerful than any headline. The news had settled, but the impact lingered. Thousands of dots filled comment sections online, each one a silent nod from workers who'd known fear, inspired by Michael's call to leave a mark if they'd suffered. Customers returned in droves, drawn by stories of reform, their presence a vote of confidence in the diner's new heart. Emma paused by the counter, her eyes scanning the room. Seeing colleagues who once avoided her now meeting her gaze with respect, she'd trained 3 new hires this week, her patience and warmth setting a tone that rippled through the staff. Daniel joined her, pointing to a slide in his training. Fear builds walls. Listening builds homes. The words landed softly, but their weight was felt, a promise to never let silence rule again. Michael watched Lily wipe a table, her small hands, careful but eager, and remembered his own days behind the counter, dreaming of a place where people felt safe. He'd almost lost that dream, blinded by years of distance, but Emma's courage, Daniel's steadiness, and Clara's sacrifice had pulled it back from the brink. In a quiet moment, he stepped outside, the diner's neon sign glowing against the morning sky, and opened his phone to record a final message. To anyone who's worked in fear, he said, his voice low but clear, leave a single dot. It's enough to be heard, enough to start change. He posted it online, the video spreading. Quickly, dots flooding the comments, a silent chorus of pain and hope. Back inside, Emma led a staff huddle, her voice steady as she shared a new policy. Every worker could report concerns anonymously, their voices protected. The applause was warm, genuine, a sound of trust earned, not demanded. Michael sat back. In his booth, Lily beside him, her rag now smudged with effort. He whispered, "Sonny's Eats isn't mine anymore. It belongs to them, to the ones who spoke up." His eyes lingered on Emma, now laughing with a customer, and Daniel, guiding a young cook with quiet patience. The diner was no longer a battlefield, but a home rebuilt on the courage of those who'd broken the silence. Before leaving, Michael looked into a news camera filming a segment on the diner's turnaround. "If you've ever felt invisible in your work, leave a dot," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Change starts with those who felt the pain." He walked away, Lily's hand in his, the diner's warmth lingering in his chest, a promise that the future would be different, built on voices that refused to stay quiet.